Welcome to the next topic of Module 7, Shoeprint Examinations. We will begin by discussing the two types of shoe prints which are encountered at crime scenes. We will also discuss the various methods of collection of shoe prints, and then finally we will discuss the class and individual characteristics for shoeprint examinations. Shoes are a very important part of a person's clothing. So they come in a wide variety of different designs and sizes. Because of this fact, shoe prints or footwear impressions can be very important evidence at crime scenes. As an individual walks or tracks, their shoes impress their distinct and individual features into a surface over which they pass. It is very important to fully document footwear impressions. Measurements should be taken and the shoe print should be photographed. Depending on the type of shoe print it is, whether it's two-dimensional or three-dimensional, you would be taking photographs slightly different. With two-dimensional patterns, you want to position the camera directly above the shoe print and hold your light to the side. But with three-dimensional patterns, you need to have the light adjusted at angles so that you can create a shadowing or a contrast to the low areas and the higher areas of the print itself. But once again, you always want the camera to be directly above the print. You would also want to make sure that you're taking the photographs with a ruler in place. A lot of times with your three-dimensional prints, you're going to be having light at 3 different locations so that you can see all the details of that pattern. So once you have documented that print, you can now make an effort to actually collect that pattern itself. Some patterns are unable to be collected, so they have to be lifted. This is going to be the case with your two-dimensional patterns. There are several techniques that can be used on the two-dimensional patterns. The first is where there is the electrostatic charge that's applied to the print itself. This is going to be used on either dry or dusty type prints. The high voltage is used to create the static charge on the lifting film, which causes the dust to transfer to the film itself. However, you need to keep in mind that these are dust images that have been transferred to the film, so you have to be very careful on your packaging of these images. There's also gelatin lifters that can be used on some surfaces, and the print itself is going to adhere to that gelatin. These are considered more of a permanent collection for your two-dimensional patterns. Depending on the print itself, there can also be different enhancers used for your two-dimensional patterns. You can either have different type of photography enhancers where you're using different filters to present different contrast, different lighting, different polarized lighting might be used, or UV lighting or infrared lighting. There are also various chemical enhancers that can be used to bring out some prints that might not as easily be visible. So you might choose to use anhydrine to further enhance a print that's in blood. However, if you are working with a three-dimensional print, then this pattern can be preserved through casting. The cast itself is going to provide a very accurate representation of that footprint. And it allows for the recovery so that you can use and see more detail to that piece of evidence. Casts are typically made with dental stone, which is a form of calcium sulfate. There are several different brands of dental stone. Once the dental stone is mixed, it can either be cast by having a form around the shoe print itself, or it might just be an open type cast that it's poured in that area. You're going to pour the casting material into the shoe print itself by using a piece of cardboard to deflect the mixture. This helps prevent any damage to the impression itself through that pouring process. It takes approximately 30 minutes for dental stone to actually set up and be hardened so that the cast itself can be recovered. Generally, when lifting the cast, some excessive soil and sand can be removed, but a lot of times it's just left attached to the cast so that the cast can completely dry before the soil is removed. You should always allow a cast to dry at least 48 hours before attempting to remove the excess soil or sand that might be adhering to it so that you can see the actual pattern a lot clearer. In some instances, it might be necessary to do dry casting or snow wax. Dry casting is where the powdered dental stone is actually put onto the imprint itself, and the moisture in the snow allows it to mix and then form the hardened cast. When doing dry casting, you would want to do several different layers, just light layers of the powder at a time. And then there are the chemical products that are actually snow wax, which is a colored product that can be used to make footprints in the snow a little bit more visible so that photographs can be taken. Casts should be stored in some type of a container to prevent them from breaking or any damage during the transportation to the laboratory. Typically, with Shoeprint examinations, the analyst is going to be concerned with identifying class characteristics and also individual characteristics. The class characteristics are initially going to be the physical size and shape of that outsole, the bottom portion of the shoe that typically is leaving the pattern. But they're also going to take into consideration that outsole pattern itself. Individual characteristics are going to be more wear type characteristics or specifically identifying characteristics to that shoe and only that shoe. So once again, to refresh our memory, class characteristics are going to be intentional or design characteristics that are common to a particular group of items. And your individual characteristics are marks produced by random imperfections. So if we talk about the class characteristics, you need to take into consideration the size and shape of that outsole. There are 4 different shoe sizing systems. Generally, the analyst would keep track in their notes the American sizes. However, a more accurate way of determining the actual shoe size would be through comparison to a particular shoe of the same design and manufacturer. Examinations of the outsole of the shoes can provide a lot of information concerning the general manufacturing process, which provides the class characteristics. And a lot of these may be relayed to the actual shoe prints themselves. So instances like this, where there's incomplete processing of the milled rubber in the calendar rolls, might actually lead to void areas in the pattern itself. Imperfections on that calendar roll during the milling process can lead to flaws in a pattern. Likewise, depending how those sheets are actually cut, if it's random die cutting, there might be a little bit of offset to that pattern. And in some instances, the placement of a thong strap is going to be through random cutting. Striations might be left by the die blade cutter in this process. Or in some instances, imprint variations might also change during the positioning during the cutting process. During some of the cutting, the random stretching of the soft outer sole may occur, causing angled edges and overlapping rubber lips. Or there might be minor compression mold differences between shoes of the same brand, design, and size. Shoes that are produced through a mold system may actually have a visible injection port and mold seam. And also ones that are molded may also contain air bubbles. However, some air bubbles may be visible because of obvious wear. So a lot of these various characteristics are going to give us a lot of indication as to how that outsole was produced. But then you can also take into consideration the randomness of how those different components are put together. And you can see, even though these are two brands of Converse Chuck Taylor All-Star shoes, there are going to be differences noted in that outsole pattern of the different shoes. In addition to the overall pattern differences, note the differences in the fox strip placement along the toe end of the shoe itself. So if we consider the individual characteristics that you might find within a shoe print, this is going to be the marks that are produced by random imperfections or irregularities of the shoe print. And it's most often going to be wear characteristics, or in some instances identifying characteristics that may have been added into that outsole pattern. The shoes people wear most tend to have the man-made outsoles, very similar to the rubber bottoms like what's on tennis shoes. So as they wear, the design and other characteristics are going to change or make changes to that pattern, causing all of these individual characteristics. So we can think of wear as the result of erosion of that outsole due to the friction of abrasive forces that occur between the outsole and the ground through use. There's going to be two different factors that can be observed with regard to the wear on a shoe: the actual position of the wear and the degree of the wear. So if we talk about the position of the wear, this is the arrangement or the pattern of the wear characteristics that stands out against areas of less or greater wear. So it's going to be very similar to, does the person have a neutral gait? Do they underpronate or do they overpronate? That wear pattern is going to be affected by their shape and size and their bone structure and the biomechanics of their feet themselves. So they're going to develop individual wear patterns consistent with the way that they walk. Areas of the outsole can be worn unevenly, and this is what's going to result in various degrees. So you can see from this example, even the wear characteristics for a single individual are going to be different from one shoe to the other. So in this instance, the characteristics on the right and the left outsoles are very different. Likewise, wear characteristics are going to change over a period of time. There may also be some individual identifying characteristics such as cuts and scratches, nicks, and things like that that might be added to that outsole pattern in a very random nature. So something as simple as this, where somebody steps in some gum, that's going to individualize a shoe print that shoe may leave. Likewise, different rocks or things that can become wedged in the outsole pattern are also going to provide individual characteristics. Cuts, scratches, tears, and gouges are also going to provide individual characteristics. And in some instances, bubbles may also be considered individual characteristics. If the bubbles are introduced during the injection mold process, these are going to be very random, and then through the normal wear of the outsole, they may be exposed. So to perform a shoe print impression comparison, the known samples must be collected and then compared to either the lifts that were made from the two-dimensional print or castings that were made from a three-dimensional print. Once again, with the known shoes, you would also want to make test impressions. And that's what you want to make sure that these test impressions are also going to have very consistent characteristics to look for when comparing to the unknown samples. When you make the test impressions, you also want to try to duplicate the weight of the individual and also a gait that they may have taken with each step. For two-dimensional impressions, this can either be done through inked impressions, inkless methods, or powdered impressions. With inked impressions, the shoe is actually placed or stepped onto an ink pad, or the ink can also be rolled onto the bottom of the shoe, and then the shoe is placed on a clean piece of paper or a chart. There's also inkless test impressions that the shoe is placed on a pad and then transferred to treated paper, which allows the impression to be viewed. In some instances, A powder can also be used to create the test impressions, and these are various powders will be used depending on the surface that's actually receiving the print itself. The analyst may also choose to make a three-dimensional impression if some of the characteristics that they're concerned with might be on the sides of the shoes themselves. So this can be done by making impressions in either sand, biofoam, or making a silicon cast. So they can make impressions by stepping into the sand and then making a plaster cast of that, or stepping into biofoam and then also plaster cast can be made from this. Or a silicon cast can actually be made around that shoe itself, giving the three dimensions again to the impression. No matter what technique is used to make the test impressions, it is very important to make sure that all of the characteristics that you're going to be looking for, whether they be class or individual characteristics, that they're going to be very reproducible. Once the exemplars have been taken, comparisons can then be made back to the lifts or the casts that were collected from the crime scene. So initially they're going to be focused in on the size and the shape and the design of the shoe itself and the shoe print, and then also taking into consideration the wear and the individual characteristics for those shoes. There isn't a set number of points that has to be required when you're performing a shoe print comparison. It actually depends on the characteristics that are being identified. So if there's several identifying characteristics that match between the shoe print from the crime scene and the known shoes, a positive identification can be made. So these shoes have very good general class characteristics, the size, the shape, and the design, in addition to some general wear. But shoes like this also have the class characteristics of size, shape, and design, but then there is also a lot of random individual characteristics to the soles of these shoes. So you can see some of the individual characteristics are going to be very minor, but you are able to do the comparisons between prints from a scene and back to a known shoe. And again, another example with arrows pointing specifically to some of the identifying characteristics. All of the characteristics, whether it's class characteristics or the individual characteristics, are taken into consideration when that comparison is performed. But you need to keep in mind that the absence of wear and individual characteristics may be the result of that imprint being so shallow, or that the features are so small that they weren't transferred to the impression. So because of this, at times, eliminations or identifications may not be possible. And the analyst has to be very careful in how they state the final results or conclusions on their report. In instances like this, comments or correspondence or dissimilarities in the design, dimension, and wear may be made. But in other instances, they are able to obtain very good results that can reflect that that shoe made or did not make the impression represented by the cast itself.